So Blizzard literally just announced some major changes for StarCraft 2. Now we quickly went over it earlier today as well, over some leaked ones, but apparently they are quite literally redesigning what the entire game is like right now when it comes to the multiplayer. So before we spoil ourselves too much, let's go ahead and start at the top and just simply read. Last year, we released patch 3.8, which unlike smaller balance patches released throughout the year, was a larger set of changes aimed at improving multiplayer StarCraft 2 through various design changes. This year, we are embarking on another design patch and are excited to share with you our initial list of changes. This time around, our general focus is to address underused units and abilities while also trying to reduce sudden game-ending moments. As with last year, this design patch will require a large amount of testing, feedback and revision before it can go live for everyone to enjoy, so we wanted to get it into your hands for testing as fast as possible. The changes in this blog will be live soon on the testing section of StarCraft 2's multiplayer, and we would like to release the final changes after this year's tournament season concludes in November, with the BlizzCon finals obviously. In the sections below, we outline the proposed changes and give some of our thoughts on each one to explain what we would like to accomplish. Alrighty. In Legacy of the Void, we changed the amount of resources in each base to promote expanding and discourage overly defensive playstyles. While the change did have the intended results, we think that there might be a way to make comebacks easier when players are denied a third or fourth base. To do this, we'd like to increase the amount of minerals on Vespian... Wait, the amount of minerals on Vespian gas geysers? As well as the large mineral... Wait. To do this, we'd like to increase the amount of minerals on Vespian gas geysers as well as the large mineral nodes. I guess someone didn't proofread this, but that's alright. This means that bases take longer to completely run out, but since it's only the large mineral nodes being adjusted, players are still encouraged to take new bases to increase their mineral income rate. This should also decrease some of the pressure on new players to secure new bases right away. Okay, large mineral nodes at bases are increased from 1500 to 1800 per node. Small mineral nodes remain at 900. Okay, Vespian geyser value increased from 2000 to 2250 to maintain the mineral to gas ratio. Okay, I was a little worried while reading this. I was secretly hoping that they were just gonna leave it as it is. But this makes, this makes at least some sense. Like, reading it as it's written out right here, I was a little bit worried that, like, the I'm gonna take 2 bases and turtle up for 3.5 hours style was gonna come back into fashion, but it turns out that that is not gonna be the case. It's a minor increase, I guess, on the mineral nodes and only the large nodes, which are basically, like, half of the amount of mineral patches on a base. And then the Vespian gas value also increased a little bit. It's not that big of a deal. Not that big of a deal. Alrighty, multiplayer changes for Terran. Last year, Terran had a major update to its mech arsenal. This year, we're looking into adjusting Mules to better synergize with Terran mech and giving them a bit more flexibility in general. We wanted to also take a look at Terran caster units and see where we could make changes to have them become more useful earlier in the game or in smaller numbers. In general, we also wanted to improve some underused options and reduce sudden game ending tactics. While the Mule admirably, there we go, performs its current job as a mineral collector, we wanted to experiment with a version that is more flexible for Terran commanders. Mules will now also be able to mine Vespian gas at a rate higher than SCVs, but lose efficiency if more than 1 mule is assigned per refinery. In exchange, the mule's mineral mining rate has been slightly reduced. Mules can now harvest Vespian gas from refineries. Mules harvest 10 Vespian gas per trip, and the mules harvest 20 minerals per trip instead of 25. I actually really like this. I mean, I've been quite vocal about the point that I don't really like mules very much. I think mules are a little bit silly. I still would love to see like a cooldown or something along those lines on mules, so you can't just like drop down like 6 in one base off of 3 command centers rather, but when it comes to like Terran styles right now, you've obviously got the bio-based style as well as the mechanical unit-based style. Mech, generally speaking, requires a lot more gas. And obviously bio will still just simply be dropping on mules, so, or minerals rather. So I think that bio is gonna still... Actually, bio is gonna be nerfed somewhat in this sense, and I guess this would be a minor buff to mech as well. But it makes sense that you have the option to harvest Vespian gas as well, right? I like that. I like that one. Unit redesign. We're exploring a redesign of the Raven's abilities to turn it into a more supportive caster role. Auto turret and point defense drone are being removed, and Seeker Missile is being redesigned. Our goal here is to address feedback that Ravens are only somewhat useful when made in small numbers and become oppressive if massed. Players should now want to make a few Ravens during a game, but not have the incentive to heavily mass-produce Ravens. Thank you very much. I'm not a big fan of turtley playstyles. I mean, I've explained that 100 times before. I'm not a big fan of the turtle style, where you can just simply sit back and max out on any unit for that matter. I mean, for Zerg, it used to be like Infestor Broodlord and Swarm Host and all those kinds of playstyles. I absolutely hated those. So I'm glad that they're, you know, addressing that. Because right now in StarCraft 2, it's really tricky. If you do manage to get like 20 Ravens out, somehow, some way, they're quite good. Let's just leave it at that. It's very tough to kill. So the new abilities are Scrambler Missile, Repair Drone, and Shredder Missile. Okay, so it removes all existing abilities. It's got Scrambler Missile, Repair Drone, and Shredder Missile. Okay. First ability is called Tremolo Missile. Tremolo Missile is an anti-mechanical unit ability that temporarily disables all weapons and unit abilities. This ability is effective against important enemy units to help swing a battle in your favor, even if you are down in supply. Since it disables abilities, this can also be used against Medevacs and Warp Prisms to prevent loading or unloading of units, cutting off retreats or incursions into your base. 50 energy, 8 range, that's a long range. Target mechanical units' weapon and abilities are disabled for a short time. I like abilities like this. These are like skill-based, interesting, you know, non-abusive kind of abilities, right? I think this is cool. At least from the text right here, it sounds really interesting. Repair Drone. It's a deployable unit that is unable to move, but has a repair beam that restores the health of a nearby friendly mechanical unit. The Repair Drone will give Terran mech commanders... Terran mech commanders. Alright, a new way to play and keep their units up and running. It costs 75 energy and it deploys a timed live repair drone. The drone can target and repair mechanical units that enter the area. Wait, so if I understand correctly, you put a drone out on the map on a given location, and as long as that drone is alive, it's gonna repair mech units in that area? Okay. I quite like that idea. Yeah, I like that idea. And then I guess we got the last one right here, Shredder Missile, which is probably the remake of the old Hunter Seeker Missile, yeah. But on impact, it works a bit differently. Instead of doing 100 splash damage, it now deals 30, but also decreases the armor of all units hit by 3 for a short duration. This is intended to stack less effectively, or efficiently rather, with itself than the old Seeker Missile, but will be more of a combo ability to use with core units such as Marines, Cyclones, or Vikings. Deploys a Shredder Missile, which activates after a short delay and pursues the target unit, dealing 30 damage on impact and reducing armor by 3 for a short duration. The recalibrated explosives upgrade has been reduced, or removed rather, and there's a new upgrade called Enhanced Munitions. Increases the blast radius of the Shredder Missile by 20 and its tracking range by 50%. I'm assuming this would make... Like, my first idea about the Shredder Missile is to use it against Zerg. Like, if Zerg would play Ultras, you would probably be able to play, like, Marine Marauder, Medevac, Liberator with Raven support, and, like, reduce the armor on Ultras. Because really, the only reason why Ultras are so very strong... First, actually, you could probably skip out the Liberator. Come to think of it, I mean, Liberators are essentially like a counter to Ultras. This would, like, reduce their armor temporarily, making the Marines and the Marauders significantly more... That's interesting. That is quite interesting. Yep. I like the changes to the Mule. I like the changes to the Raven. Additional changes. The Widow Mine. In an effort to reduce certain game-ending moments, we want to try making Widow Mines easier to clean up. They will now be refueled when their weapon is reloading, even if they are still burrowed. This should make cleaning up unattended Widow Mines much easier, while still allowing the Widow Mine to perform its splash damage role if properly set up with a Terran army or used defensively. Widow Mines are now revealed while Sentinel Missile is on cooldown. I mean, I'm a Zerg player, you know, by heart. I mean, I'll take that. I don't think this is one of those changes, like, this is one of those changes, right, that won't really affect professional play that much. Because professional players are already dealing with Widow Mines just fine. But it's one of those things that will help out so much for, like, anywhere below Grandmaster level. Right? Like, this is one of those things that is I mean, I've done a lot of Zerg coaching. This is one of those things that can absolutely demolish Zerg players because, you know, Overseers have got this tendency to fly ahead of the army and, you know, they get hit by the Widow Mine and then they die. You can't kill the Widow Mine. You know, it's a mess. Whereas if you're really good control, I mean, the Overseer won't fly ahead and you just easily clean them up, right? This is quite cool. I actually really like this. I mean, these changes are really cool. Ghost. Okay, so Ghosts are probably the most underused unit right now in StarCraft 2. The elusive and deadly Ghost. Oh man, this is already starting off bad. Is already a strong late game tech choice for the Terran compositions. However, we wanted to try out having a Ghost's key defensive ability, Cloak, come online faster while balancing this out by breaking out the Mobius reactor upgrade and putting it back on the Ghost Academy. This is intended to help players transition into Ghosts more safely in the mid-late game and possibly make Ghost as an unusual but strategic opener for Terran players. Cloak is now available by default on Ghosts. The Ghosts now start with 50 energy instead of 75, and Mobius reactor is re-added to the Ghost Academy, and it provides additional starting energy for the Ghost. Okay, default cloaked. I mean, okay. I mean, I like Ghost. I think they're an awesome unit. They're very, very underutilized right now. You know, the primary use right now of Ghost in Zerg vs. Terran, for example, is to shoot down the big Zerg units like Ultras. And then, of course, also the, what's it called? The Brute Lord, right? They're great against those. But then again, Zerg can easily counter it. For Zerg versus, or for Terran versus Protoss rather, you see the Ghost primarily used as an EMP kind of unit that can try and shut down the energy on High Templar. That's kind of their primary use in that matchup. So you try and EMP down the High Templar to not get stormed. I guess making them cloaked by default is going to make it easier to like get those EMPs off, as well as get those... I don't think it will really affect Zerg vs. Terran much. But that's still cool. I like that one a lot. Alright. Liberator! It's getting a minor design change to its vision when deployed in Defender mode. Instead of getting a flat vision increase to allow it to fire its... Yes, okay. It will get extra vision within the targeted circle. This lets the Liberator still fire unsupported, but makes it easier for opponents to sneak around its vision or attack from alternate angles. No longer gains bonus vision when using Defender mode, and now gains vision of its target location in Defender mode. Okay. Makes it a little bit more of a unique unit. Makes it a little bit better for a RAS, and makes it a little easier to counter. Right? Cool. Cyclone. We want the Cyclone's lock-on ability to feel a bit more... Okay, so right now, before I read any more, right? The Cyclone lock-on ability is quite literally like a little tickle. It's like... I'm gonna like tickle that Warp Prism. It deals a little bit of damage, but like... Cyclone lock-on is not very impressive. It's almost like a sentry attacking. I mean, you can't quite stand underneath it, but like... A full like cycle of a Cyclone's anti-air attack, which I think lasts like 15 seconds, is not enough to kill an Overlord. It takes 2. So like Cyclone lock-on is not that impressive. Anyway, so they wanted to feel a little bit more impactful than it does currently. To that end, we are making it so that the first 4 shots will fire rapidly to help increase the guaranteed damage that the Cyclone can deal to its target. We're also introducing a new upgrade to increase the Cyclone's lock-on damage against armored units. While the Cyclone is not intended as an all-round anti-air option, we wanted to try experimenting with giving its anti-air weapon a bit more long-term use. The first 4 shots of lock-on fire more rapidly. Total damage of time remains at... Okay, so the total damage over time remains at 160. And then there is armor-piercing rockets that... Okay, so the only thing that makes me a little worried about this is that the Cyclone can become too much of an all-round unit. Then again, what flyer units are armored? I think it's only the really big ones, right? So it's not that big of a deal. It's not that big of a deal. I do like this change a lot. I think that's a really cool change. I mean, you can try and gun down units right now, right? Like, for example, if a Protoss is trying to be cheeky with its Mothership core and constantly fly back and forth, bait you into Photon Overcharge, the lock-on can actually feel kind of scary. Nice. There's also a new upgrade called Smart Servos. This upgrade will make Thors, Hellions, Hellbats, and Vikings transform much faster. This is a rather experimental change to see if we can see some micro out of Terran transformation mechanic. However, we are not targeting Terran siege units such as the Siege Tank and Liberator with this upgrade, as we feel... No, that would be terrible. That would be bad if like the Siege Tank and the Liberator could also unsiege. So the Hellion, Hellbat, Thor, and Viking transformation times are reduced heavily. It's located at the Factory Tech Lab. Okay. Overall, I really like these Terran changes. The abilities are far more interesting, and it seems like there's a lot more, like, uniqueness. That's not even a proper word, but the units seem a lot more fascinating. I like this a lot. Sounds awesome. Sounds really good. Now, you can already see right there what happened to the Protoss. And I heard about this earlier today. We'll go over that in a second. The multiplayer update for the Protoss. With Protoss, we are looking into smoothing out control of certain units within the Protoss arsenal, especially in regards to their core splash damage options with the High Templar, Colossus, and Disruptor. We also wanted to take another look at the early game defenses of Protoss, especially the ubiquitous Mothership core, and seeing if we could make these defenses resolve more around the basic Protoss early game units. Since these changes are quite large, we will be keeping a close eye on how they all work out. Unit removal. In perhaps the most experimental and risky change of this update, we're trying out removing the Mothership core and moving its early game defenses to the Nexus itself. This is not a minor change, and we will be paying close attention to how this plays out during game testing. In doing this change, we hope to somewhat simplify Protoss early game defenses by concentrating defensive power into the Nexus itself, rather than a specialized unit that moves between them. So the Mothership core is arguably the strongest unit in the game. I mean, on paper it doesn't seem that amazing, but utility-wise it's incredible. What I do always feel like... So here's the one thing that I feel like is kind of like bad about the Mothership core. It's always sort of felt like a band-aid, if that makes any sense. Rather than like fixing the core issues that like Zealots and Stalkers and Sentries and whatnot have in the early game. They sort of just added the Mothership core, and the Mothership core just addressed all of those issues, and it always felt a little wonky. Also, another issue that I've currently got with Protoss is that it feels a little bit too vulnerable. Like, everything is like a glass cannon, where if you make one slip up, you're essentially dead, where I feel like Terran and Zerg are a little bit more forgiven. And one of the main, like, reasons for that is the Mothership core. I mean, if you misposition the Mothership core, or you've got it on your all-army hotkey, or you randomly fly it away and you, like, don't have it in range to do the photon, you just die, right? So, it's an experimental change, but the idea of it I do like. I'm just a little worried for Protoss early game. Let's have a look. Mothership core removed. There's a redesigned Nexus ability called Chrono Boost. Okay, there's also a new Nexus ability called Mass Recall, and there's also a new one called Shield Restore. Is that like a shield battery? We're changing Chrono Boost to behave more like it did during Heart of the Swarm, where it costs energy to cast and lasts a fixed duration. Its macro boost rate is overall similar to how the ability currently functions in Legacy of the Void. By moving the macro ability back to being an energy cost, there will be an interesting decision to make between spending energy on Chrono Boost, on macro boosting, or defenses. Alright, so it costs 50 energy, it lasts for 10 seconds, and it boosts the work rate by 100%. I like that. I've always liked that Chrono Boost version. I think it's awesome. So this is what it used to be for a very long time in StarCraft 2 until Legacy of the Void. So now you actually have to like choose macro properly on Protoss. They once upon a time like changed it to what it's currently at to make like the game a little easier. So we'll see. There's also now a spell called Mass Recall. We have changed how Mass Recall works. Now Mass Recall will bring back units in a target location to the Nexus that cast the ability. This should allow for Protoss players to make the choice to be more active on the map with their units. As games go longer, this could be increasingly give Protoss players more mobility as they take and hold more bases. We don't want this to result in super safe army movement, so when units are being recalled, they will be unable to attack or move while the ability is being channeled before they are called back to the Nexus. Oh, okay. So this is what I don't like about Mass Recall. Sometimes it feels like it's very, very forgiving, where like you move across the map, you Mass Recall back, and you're like, oh, nothing even happened. Wasn't any risk, and that's a particular true for the Arbiter, I guess, in StarCraft 1 for that matter. In StarCraft 1 though, it seems like the Arbiter is primarily used as like an aggressive tool for Mass Recall rather than what it's right here on the Nexus. It costs 100 energy, so it's the cost of 2 Chrono Boosts. And after 4 seconds, all units in the target area are teleported to the Nexus. Units are unable to move or attack during this time. I actually like this. I think this is going to be something that's absolutely critical for Protoss if you want to make them viable at all in the early game. You need to have some sort of like... Since Protoss is so heavily reliant on their units, and like you can't really make too many mistakes, this is actually pretty interesting. I like this idea of them being unable to attack for a little while and, you know, allowing like counterplay to it. So that's 4 seconds of not attacking or moving. I think actually that's pretty cool. Shield recharge. To replace Photon Overcharge, we're trying out a shield recharge mechanic. This should allow Protoss players to use more of their combat units for defense. Currently, the ability works on both buildings and units, so that players can decide if they want to keep important structures alive during all-ins or heavy harass. It costs 1 energy per 3 shield restored. Its range is 8, rather long range actually. That's like pretty much the entire base around the Nexus. It has auto-cast functionality and it can be cast on units or structures. Oh, okay. So, this is essentially like a shield battery, in a way, right? So you put down, you don't have to put down, you know, any buildings for it, I suppose, but you can recharge shields on your units, plus it can be on autocast. So if you save up 100 energy on your mothership, or not on your mothership, rather. If you save up 100 energy on your Nexus, you can actually restore 300 shields, which is a lot, right? 8 range is a long range as well, so you can reach like pretty much every unit. Plus on top of that, it can be used on units and structures. So for example, if your opponent is doing early push, you've got a single cannon up, you can probably keep that cannon alive for quite some time. I do feel like this right here could make early game for Protoss at least doable, but it's gonna be very tricky. Cool. I like the test. Like, I like the testing here. I think that's really cool. Alrighty. Additional changes. With the removal of the Mothership core, we're also looking into Protoss' other early game units. In particular, we wanted to try sharpening the role of the Stalker and make it more of a shoot and move unit with sniping capabilities. To do this, we are slowing its attack rate but increasing its damage per shot. Increases the Stalker's particle Disruptor weapon from 10, 14 versus armored, to 15, 21 versus armored. It also increases the weapon period, which is basically the cooldown in between shots, from 1.03 to 1.54. So it now essentially deals more damage, but it's got more fire time in between. I think this is effectively speaking the exact same amount of DPS. Particle Disruptor now gets +2 damage per weapon upgrade, up from +1. Cool. Cool. I like this. I think that's really cool. So the DPS is essentially the same, although it does benefit more from upgrades. But that makes sense because it's also going to shoot slower. And it essentially becomes a lot more like a Dragoon in this sense, right? I mean, Dragoons should rather... I guess Dragoons are a little bit more beefy than Stalkers, but I like that. May as well like remove the Stalker and add a Dragoon, right? Disruptor. While we would... Wait, sorry, I'm derping out. While we like how much micro the current Disruptor provides, we thought that we could try making it do damage more consistently, with slightly less game-ending potential per shot. To do this, we are making it so that the Purification Nova has a triggering detonation circle in the middle of the shot. So if an enemy unit comes in contact with a Purification Nova, it will detonate immediately. Wait. To do this, we're making it so that the Purification Nova has a triggering detonation circle in the middle of the shot. So if an enemy unit comes in contact with a Purification Nova, it will detonate immediately. In exchange, the damage per shot is reduced, but the cooldown is reduced as well. This allows the Purification Nova to hit more constantly against opposing armies, but each shot is less likely to detonate in the center of the enemy forces and cripple them. Purification Nova now detonates on contact with enemy units. Purification Nova still lasts 2 seconds before detonating. Damage is reduced from 145 plus 55 to shields to 135 plus 25 to shields. And its cooldown has been reduced as well. Oh, okay. From reading this, I assumed they would reduce the damage heavily and increase or reduce the cooldown heavily as well. But it's not that big of a difference. When dropped from a War Prism, the Disruptor Purification Nova will be set to a brief cooldown, as it felt a little too strong versus worker lines otherwise. So this is like sort of like a Baneling detonation, right? Okay, cool. Colossus. As mentioned in the previous update, we wanted to take another look at the Colossus role in Protoss splash damage. With the High Templar filling the role of general splash damage and the Disruptor dealing burst damage, we wanted to push the Colossus towards a consistent anti-light armor role. In addition, the extended thermal lens upgrade has perhaps too much power locked behind it for the Colossus' more niche role, so we're looking into making it easier to obtain. Damage changed from 12 to 10, 15 versus light. Damage per upgrade changed from 1 to 1 plus 1 versus light. There's range increase from 6 to 7, extended thermal lens. Now instead of goes up to, well, it still goes up to 9 range, I suppose, but the default range is going to be this, you know, a little bit longer. Cost increase from 200 to 150, 150 on the extended thermal lens research. Okay, I like that. I'm pretty sure that this will still just make Protoss open up Colossus every time. But I do like the idea of it. I'm not sure about the Disruptor. But fair enough. Carrier. For the Carrier, we wanted to slightly increase the cost of their interceptors. We don't want to remove the Carrier's role from the game as a powerful endgame unit, but feedback from the community is that it can overpower in this role due to easily replacing lost interceptor units. Interceptor cost increase from 10 to 15 minerals. Okay. The High Templar's abilities and role are already in a solid state in Legacy of the Void. Instead, we wanted to try making the unit slightly easier to use. To do this, we are adding a very low damage auto attack to the High Templar, like in the campaign. This will keep the High Templar further back during fights and avoid its charging. Oh, okay, I like that idea a lot. I was gonna say, how does that make it easier? But since they won't be waddling forward because they don't have an attack, they're gonna stay in the back a little bit more. Okay. Huh. Okay, I like that. So it deals very small amounts of damage. I mean, it doesn't deal a lot of damage, but it prevents it from, like, walking to the front of your army. I like that, because I always feel like Protoss late-game armies, like, even though the joke is that Protoss is the A-move race in StarCraft 2, I always feel like Protoss is probably the least A-move race in StarCraft 2. Maybe that's just me, though. Maybe I'm crazy. But I always feel like maxed out Protoss armies are really tough to micro, so this makes it a little bit easier. In particular, once again, at, like, lower level of play, and it won't affect the pro scene. Cool. With the removal of the Mothership core, we have adjusted the abilities of the Mothership itself. This is not likely its final state, but it's just a starting point. It's now built directly from the Nexus, just like it used to be. It no longer can cast Photon Overcharge. Mass recall now works like the Nexus version above. All units targeted will be recalled to the Mothership. So this is like an Arbiter then, right? So this is like an offensive mass recall. The Nexus ones are more like defensive mass recall, where you like use it to like pull units back towards your base. The Mothership can then be used to like offensively recall units towards your opponent's base. I like this one a lot. The only issue is that you can go with the Mothership, right? Do an offensive call into your opponent's base and then be like, oh no, I want to get out and just lose any of your 16 Nexus or Nexi or Nexus, whatever it is. Use any of your 16 existing Nexuses to like recall the entire army back when it goes bad. Protoss is gonna be able to recall all over the place. Protoss is gonna be able to like recall all over the place, which is gonna be quite insane. While we don't want to make the Protoss ability gameplay any more complicated, we wanted to try making observers more useful for ladder players. Currently, observers are selected with the Select All Army button, F2 by default, which can often bring observers out of position and their untimely demise. While we'd like to keep observers in this selection, we are considering adding the ability to deploy your observers for increased vision range in exchange for being unable to move. New ability called Surveillance Mode, the observer is unable to move and gains 25% more vision. I love this. I think that's really cool. I think this is really cool. This is something that you've got in co-op, where you can put your observers on maintenance mode or like surveillance mode. I think that's really cool. Now, one thing that I was secretly hoping for that I'm not seeing in this list of changes to Protoss is a change to warp gates, okay? So this is something that's, and I don't know if they're ever gonna do this or add it, but something I would love to see on Protoss, ever since like day one, is a reason for Protoss players to switch back from the warp gate to the gateway. So you know how you can switch a gateway to a warp gate after researching warp gate in the Cybernetics core? And you know how warp gate research is literally the first thing you research in any Protoss game ever? There's never a reason for Protoss to switch back towards a gateway. I would love it if you could like produce Zealots or Stalkers or any of these units like 20% faster when you switch your warp gates back towards a gateway. So the way I imagine that, right, and I've been thinking about this like for years, I guess, but the way I would love to see it is that you could simply use warp gates to play offensively, right? So say you want to fight your opponent, you move all of your gateways towards warp gates and you warp in on the other side of the map, which is cool, right? Just like it is right now. But then you have to play defensively. You can get away with one less gateway per base And you basically change all of your warp gates back to gateways, and you start producing out of the 3 gateways instead of the 4 that you normally need per base. I don't know. But I would love that. Like, I would love if they would, like, make a reason, right? And my, like, non-game designer point of view, I guess, would be to just simply switch it back towards a gateway again and, like, produce stuff. I don't know. I think this would be really cool. I think this would be really cool. But then again, what would I know, right? Anyway, overall, definitely a big fan of the Protoss changes here as well. I love the ballsy move of removing the Mothership core and just making the core Protoss army stronger. Yep. Yep, no, I like it. I think it's cool. And there's also no longer, and this is quite interesting, there's no more Photon Overcharge at all in the game. Right? That's kind of weird. I mean, Protoss has been relying on Photon Overcharge for like 5 years. Alrighty, let's have a look at the Zurich changes. Since last year's update, we have seen a number of new strategies and tactics come from the Zerg. This time around, we are looking into encouraging more direct interaction with creep spread from Zerg specialist units and wanted to increase the utility of the Lurker. Additionally, we want to look into experimenting with Zerg ground-based anti-air options outside of the Queen and the Hydralisk. Looking forward as the testing progresses, we want to make sure that Zerg has enough aggressive options before late game so that Zerg players don't feel heavily pressured into only defensive play. I feel like there's plenty of aggressive options right now for Zerg. Am I misreading this? Looking forward, we want to make sure that Zerg does... Okay, maybe they're maybe they're nerfing the Hydra Bane style or the Mutiling Bane style. I don't know. Unit redesign. For the Infestor, we want to try experimenting with making the unit interact more with creep. We also want to see if we could reduce some of the game-ending potential of fungal growth while keeping it as strong as a strong disable area of effect ability. We are changing fungal growth to no longer hit air units, and those units hit off creep will now be slowed instead of rooted. At the same time, those units who are hit on creep are now rooted to the creep, and the overall radius of fungal growth is larger. Since this affects Zerg anti-air, we will be closely watching to make sure that Zerg still has sufficient options in this area. I've always thought that rooting is, in like game design terms, inferior to slowing, right? Even though this is a hurting like change to Zerg infestors, I think that slowing is a far more interesting mechanic rather than like making it fully rooted and like unable to like have any kind of counterplay. At least when you're slowed, you can still like try and micro and like, you know. I quite like this. I also like the idea of it making a more power, or like it being like a more powerful on creep kind of unit. That does mean that, and like here's the thing about creep spread, right? That doesn't mean that you will have to focus a lot more on creep spread. And one thing that I've noticed from like coaching a lot of people is that up to like Diamond League, people don't really spread a whole lot of creep at all. Or they get like really focused on the creep spread early game and then it quickly falls off, right? Creep spread is kind of unforgiving in that sense. So this is gonna heavily help out players that are really good at creep spread. And I feel like this would quite heavily affect like professional play as well. Although it kind of depends on how much the slow is, I suppose. Anyway, the Infested Terran ability for the Infestor is also being changed. Currently the unit is used as a last resort and we think that there is a potential to make it a bit more useful. But we do not want Infested Terrans to become a main army composition. Instead, we are trying out having Infested Terrans move into an anti-air role with a weaker anti-ground attack. Huh. Fungal growth. Radius increased from 2 to 2.5. No longer hits air units. Units hit off creep will have their movement speed reduced by half. And units on creep are immobilized. Very cool. Very cool. Infested Terrans. Infested Terran is probably the most underused ability in the game right now. Once upon a time it was heavily overused. Basically the way that Blizzard nerfed it is by removing its you know, benefits from Zurich Missile upgrades. Back in the day, Infested Terrans would benefit from Missile and Carapace upgrades. So if you were going Roach Hydra, you were already researching melee or Missile and Carapace research anyway, and your Infested Terrans would benefit from that too. At some point, Blizzard quite literally removed the ability for that unit to you know, benefit from those upgrades, and with that, the Infested Terran was basically, you know, it was basically gone. There was no more reason to ever make an Infested Terran. So it now benefits from Zerg Missile attacks and ground Carapace upgrades. That is kind of risky. That is kind of risky. Infested Gauss Rifle damage decreased from 8 to 6. Infested Gauss Rifle no longer hits air units. And it's got a new weapon called Acid Spores instead. Wait, I thought they didn't want to make it too strong. But now it benefits from missile attacks and ground carapace. I guess if you get to +3 then it deals slightly more damage, right? Interestingly enough, I'm not sure anymore how ground carapace works on Infestor Terran, but it's gonna make them quite strong once you get to 3-3. Infested Gauss Rifle no longer hits air. There's a new weapon on them called Acid Spores. It deals 14 damage. Pretty quick attack speed, actually. And it prioritizes anti-air over anti-ground. Infested Terrans spawn much faster on creep. Cool! We may actually, like Zerg players that is, they may actually be able to use the Infestor as a reliable anti-air unit. Infested Terrans spawn much faster on creep. That's quite interesting. I like these kind of changes though. Like they're like gameplay kind of changes rather than like complete overhauls to like core units. Other than like, you know, obviously the Protoss ones that we went over. Quite cool. Unit redesign for the Lurker. We like its current role as a zone controller, but we think that its current window of use is a bit too small. This is due to a combination of the Lurker then being soft-locked behind the important Hydralisk Muscular Augments upgrade, and when the game goes late game detection, or rather, when the games go late, detection can heavily reduce their effectiveness. To address this, we have split off the Lurker Den into its own building that can be made from a drone once a Hydralisk Den has been built. Additionally, we are adding a new upgrade called Dig-In Claws on the Lurker Den, which increases the Lurker's move speed and burrow speed. Our goal here is to give the Lurker more late-game utility with detectors, when detectors are more numerous. In particular with that, like, surveillance mode on the Observer, right? Mutate to Lurker Den, removed from the Hydralisk Den, and there's a new building called a Lurker Den. It's 100 minerals, 115 Vespian gas, and it still takes about 4.5 ages to build. There's also a new upgrade in the Lurker Den called Dig-In Claws. Located on the Lurker Den, requires hive, costs 150 minerals and gas, and it reduces the burrow time, increases the movement speed also quite significantly. That's a solid increase in movement speed right there, about 10-15% faster. So essentially the main difference here is that previously you would have to wait for your muscular... Like basically what they're saying right here, right? For those of you confused. Generally speaking, Zurich does not go for the Lurker Den before getting muscular augments. Well, technically speaking, you can. Muscular augments is too important of an upgrade to not get. So right now, instead of like having to go double Hydra Den, which is just simply too expensive, you can go Hydralisk Den, muscular augment, Lurker Den, which probably adds about a 45-second window or so to the unit. And then also that upgrade for late game style. I actually really like this. This is cool. I mean, it's hard to say how good this is. I mean, it reduces burrow time. By how much? Right? Does that also increase or reduces unburrow time? Because sometimes, for example, you burrow the unit and you're like, oh snap, I don't want it here. Does it also reduce the unburrow time? It doesn't say that, but I'm assuming it probably just pops in and out faster. Lurkers do a lot of damage though, so I wonder, like this could easily become too strong. So they have to be very careful with a Lurker. Basically, the Lurker is one of those units that when you play against it really well, it almost does nothing. Where you're not paying attention to your army and you walk into Lurkers, your army's gone. That's kind of the Lurker right now. So, alright, well, let's see. Additional changes as well to the Viper. The Viper's Parasitic Bomb ability is often used as an all-or-nothing mass cast tactic. You want to get as many Parasitic Bombs ready as possible and cast them all at once to destroy the enemy quickly. We wanted to keep the ability as a strong anti-air option, but make it no longer exponentially grow in power. By increasing its damage, a Viper user can be more confident about targeting enemies being destroyed, or targeted enemies rather being destroyed. Damage no longer stacks with the other Parasitic Bomb effects, and the damage is increased from 90 to 180. So right now, the way that Parasitic Bomb works is that if you cast it on one unit right here, it's gonna start dealing damage to all of the other units around it as well. But if there's like another unit right next to him, and that unit also gets affected by Parasitic Bomb, it's gonna take double damage, right? From the one of his buddy and as well the other guy. And then, you know, if you've obviously got like 6 Void Rays all on top of each other and you Parasitic Bomb 6 Void Rays, they're all gonna take like 540 damage in like, you know, a matter of seconds, which is basically the reason that they're talking about with this. It's basically the reason why they're talking about like an all or nothing mass cast tactic. The main reason, though, why I feel like most people use Vipers is against, like, mass air styles, right? I don't know if you're ever gonna make a Viper against, like... I mean, one... like, if there's 1 or 2 carriers out, you're not gonna make Vipers, right? Unless I'm missing something obvious here, I feel like this won't really affect gameplay all too much. I mean, I don't think Vipers are that reliable of an anti-air unit anyway, if your opponent is decent at micro. I guess it will affect it, though, in Zerg vs. Terran mech. When Terran mech is heavily becoming, you know, a little bit too hard to stop, you can Parasitic Bomb, like, you know, all of the air units that they have got. In particular, Vikings and all that. But I would be a little bit worried, once again, with their repair drone that they're adding on the Raven. Right? How does that work? Like, if you put a Parasitic Bomb down on a bunch of Vikings, and you put a repair, like, drone from the Raven, the new ability that it just gained, right next to it, or right on top of it, is that gonna cancel each other out, mostly? I don't know. Cool change, though. I like the idea of it. I always feel like Parasitic Bomb right now is a little bit too all or nothing, and at least that's being addressed. Overseer. Much like the Observer, we wanted to try and make Overseers less likely to run to its doom if a player was intending for them to hold position somewhere. There's a new ability called Oversight. The Overseer is unable to move and gains 25% more vision. Massive fan of these abilities. I think these are really cool. I think these are really cool. Kind of a funny name, Oversight. But fair enough. Fair enough. I think these are really cool abilities. Swarm Host. For the Swarm Host, we wanted to increase the counterplay options against them by slowing down its movement speed off creep to that of the Siege Tank and Immortal... Wait. For the Swarm Host, we wanted to increase the counterplay options against them by slowing down its movement speed off creep to that of the Siege Tank and Immortal opposing players should have an easier time counterattacking Swarm Host. Its move speed on creep is unchanged, however, keeping creep spread very appealing to a Swarm Host user. A Swarm Host nerf? So, I don't really play a mechanical style when I play Terran, and I don't play... Well, I play quite a bit of Protoss, but I don't really see Zerg players make Swarm Host against Protoss that much. I wonder how big of a deal this is. That's essentially like a 25% movement speed reduction. Swarm Hosts are rather fast. I guess this is essentially a buff to Gumiho. I think this is essentially a buff to Gumiho, where he's really good at chasing down Swarm Hosts with Metavex and Thors in them, which is quite interesting. But, I don't know. I feel like Swarm Hosts are really good against, like, the Turtle Mech kind of style. I always feel like they're pretty okay against Protoss sometimes, but really, like, the Hydra Bane style is the absolute standard. I'm not sure. I don't think you could, like, it almost reads like Siege Tanks and Immortals can counter him, but it doesn't really work like that, right? Because if you, like, fly up with the Locust and there's a Siege Tank right there, you just send him down on the Siege Tank and you kill the Siege Tank in, like, a split second. Oh, that's it. Keep in mind that this is a first pass on the design update for November this year. Things may look very different as testing goes on, with numbers changing, new changes being added, or other areas being rolled back. We are very excited about the potential that these changes have for the StarCraft 2 multiplayer community. And the test matchmaking queue will be activated soon. Please let us know what you think in the comments below and have fun. Alright, should we go to the comments below? This is a risky place. Oh, there's one comment. Very interesting. Excited to see how this plays out. So, the thing is that... Oh, okay. No, I don't really want to log back in. The thing is that these kinds of changes, they're really good after, like, extensive testing, right? Because right now, you can't really say if one race is really getting buffed all too much. It seems like Terran is getting some buffs. It seems like Protoss is getting nerfs, and it seems like Zerg is getting a bunch of nerfs. But it's really hard to say how it actually actively plays out in games, right? Because, I mean, Zerg versus Terran, it's going to be completely different. Protoss versus Zerg is going to be very different. Protoss versus Terran, I mean, the ghost change alone, with just, like, early game, like, Cloak, which is probably the most insignificant change, is already going to heavily affect that matchup. Because all of a sudden, like, Protoss is going to need early game detection to actually deal with you know, potential ghost rushes and all that. So there's like a massive amount of changes that do change the outcome quite heavily. So let's go over them real quick, right? Economy changes, not a fan. I wish they wouldn't do this, but it's not a big deal. Mules, I'm a fan. Ravens, I'm a fan. Much better unit right there. Widowmine, massive fan. Ghost, big fan. Liberator, big fan. Cyclone, big fan. Smart servos, sounds cool. In particular because it does not affect siege tanks and liberators. Unit removal of the Mothership core, massive fan. Chrono boost changes, cool. Mass recall changes, probably cool. Shield recharge, really cool. Shield recharge is something that is heavily missed in StarCraft 2. I think it's really cool. Stalker, cool. Really like that. Disruptor, I'm not sure. I don't think I like the Disruptor changes very much. I don't really like the fact that Protoss has got like High Templar, Colossus, and Disruptors for Splash, but I guess I've been having that issue ever since Legacy of the Void. So, you know, there's that. Not a big fan of the Disruptor as it is right now in StarCraft 2, and I don't think I like it very much after this, but, you know, I guess if you don't like it, you've got other options to play, right? Disruptor will always be like a very, like, specific kind of unit. I feel like the Colossus change might be a little bit too much, because I feel like you're always going to use Colossus over Disruptors, right? Like, I'm always trying to think here, unless you want to go for like a drop play, but then the War Prism drop is going to be... I feel like Colossus is going to be the gold standard once more, but fair enough. The Carrier. I like the Carrier change, yes. High Templar changes, I think that one is really cool. Mothership definitely seems interesting that you can mass recall towards the unit, rather than mass recall back towards home. You can like offensively mass recall, which I think is really cool. Observer changes, love that. I think that's really cool. Infestor changes. I like the changes to the Infested Terran. I'm not sure about fungal growth. I feel like it becomes a little complicated. I would rather just see all of the units have their movement speed reduced rather than immobilized on creep, but I guess I guess I'm essentially asking there to a bigger nerf to fungal, which is... I just feel like it gets a little confusing with this many, like... You know, I don't know. It gets a little strange. But anyway, I do like the changes to the Infested Terran. Lurker then changes, love that. Viper changes, don't think I like that all too much, but it's alright. Overseer changes, love that. Swarm host changes, alright. And all things considered, I mean, it seems awesome. Now, Zurich is most definitely getting the short end of the stick when it comes to their exciting changes. I mean, there is no like new strategy that immediately pops in my head. I am definitely looking forward to trying out Protoss. I mean, this is gonna entirely, like, change out the Protoss early game. And this is what is gonna be weird, right? Like, initially, for the first couple of months, Protoss is gonna be considered a really weak race. Protoss is gonna be considered a really weak race because people will have to completely figure out their early game play once again. But I think after a while, this could become really interesting. Terran changes, I mean, lots of new options right there. I mean, just simply pushing more gas in the early game, like, it allows you to get a ton more interesting units out as well. Very cool. So as soon as this go live, I will most definitely be checking it out. Thank you very much for watching. Have an amazing day. Do not forget to smile, alright? And I will see you guys in the next one.